Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to Barker's favorite day of the year, otherwise known as the Barker Adoption Foundation's annual Foster Care and Adoption Conference. This year's conference examines and celebrates the importance of connections and relationships with the theme, Let's Get Connected, the importance of relationship in adoption. And connected we are. While we did our best to bring you together online in the last 3 years, it was just not the same as being together in person, and I've heard that from many of you this morning. We're thrilled that we are here with you. How do you guys feel about being back? Good? Good. Whether it's your first, 15th, or 29th conference, I, Sue Holler, the privileged executive director of the Adoption Foundation, and our staff welcome you. I hope that you will come away from today feeling inspired, challenged, and connected. It's a day to connect with new friends and to reunite with old friends. I want to thank the Barker staff who have done an outstanding job planning today's conference. I also want to thank our board of directors, who I think are concentrated over in this direction, who generously give of their time, their energy, and their dollars to support our mission. Thank you. Thank you to our sponsors, John Freeman and his company, Chesapeake Management Group, and to Design Data, Barker's outstanding IT provider, who were generous sponsors of today's conference. Just a couple logistical notes. You'll be in this room 3 times today, this morning, for lunch, and the closing session. The breakout sessions are in adjacent building, and staff will happily guide you to those places. We'll close today's session with a panel and a gift basket. You must be present to win. You should have all received a raffle ticket. And additionally, those of you who have signed up for continuing education credits must stay to the end, sign out, and complete an evaluation. So back to connections. Naturally, I've been thinking a lot about connections recently, and I came across this simple, anonymous quote that really struck me. A connection is the energy that exists between 2 people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. I hope that you will feel seen, heard, and valued today, and that you will offer the same grace to see, hear, and value your fellow attendees. If we all approach today with that goal, I have no doubt we will walk away stronger individuals and a stronger community. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Tori Hope Peterson. Tori, author of the best-selling book, Fostered, is a former foster youth who has turned her experience into action. She is a foster care reformer, an adoption advocate, a passionate voice for vulnerable children, and a mom by birth and adoption. Tori, I thought I had a busy week. You topped it. Tori says that she and her husband, Jacob, have 3 of the sweetest kids, including one who is now an adult. I imagine we might hear a little bit about them today. Some say Tori's tale is that of an unlikely overcomer. I would like to think that her story of healing is one that we can collectively make possible for hundreds of other children. Tori will provide us with her insight and guidance on how to help children. Her book will also be available for purchase, and she'll be signing the books at lunch. Tori also will be hosting an Ask the Author session in the first block of breakouts. Thank you again for joining us today, And please join me in warmly welcoming Tori Hope Peterson.
I got dressed in my Uber this morning. I had this blanket. I always travel everywhere I go with a blanket, and my plane was delayed because the parking brake didn't work. That's a really good reason to be delayed. And so I told my Uber driver, I was like, I'm about to do a transformation in your car. I'm very sorry. So I'm so thankful that I made it here to be with you guys. Whenever I'm asked to speak for an hour, it is the only time I get a little bit nervous because it's a long time. And when I was in the foster care system, I think there was this idea that like my voice wasn't valued and that what I had to say didn't matter when I advocated for myself. And so when someone asked me to speak for an hour, I'm like, are you sure? But I'm going to, so please hold on. As they said, I grew up in the foster care system. I first entered the foster care system when I was 3 years old due to a drug bust. My mom was dating one of the largest drug lords in Toledo, Ohio. And I was taken from my home, and I just remember my mom crying, my baby, my baby. And it was always very clear to me from a young age that my mom loved me a lot, and she told me a lot. My mom always said that I was beautiful. She always told me that I was smart, and she always said that she loved me. And in my eyes, I was always safe. The grown-ups that were around me, they didn't physically hurt me. And so when I was taken for that first time, I just said, I just want to go back to my mom. And so the foster care system did one of its jobs, and it actually reunified me and my mom. But then my mom was a single mom. And then as I was growing up and as time went on, my mom, she was diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. And so the abuse and the chaos in our home got increasingly worse. And at this point, I had a sister. She was 9.5 years younger than me. And things were just getting quite bad at home. And I had teachers who had asked me about bruises and scratches, but I would always make excuses. I'd say like, oh, I ran into a door, or that was my dog. I didn't have a dog. But there was one teacher that was really smart, and she finally said, no, that's not the case. And she took me to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor called Human Services, and they came and they took pictures, and I re-entered the foster care system. Strangely, I lived with a kinship family for a short amount of time that was very unequipped to take care of my sister and I. And we were there for about 3 weeks before we went back to go live with my mom. And during that time, I will never understand quite why we went back or what happened, because I remember when I was in my kinship home feeling like I was finally safe. And then one day, my mom just picked me up. And so the abuse kept getting worse, and there was one evening when my mom hit me, and for the first time, I hit her back. She called the police on me, and I went to a juvenile detention center, and I spent 18 days there waiting for a court date. On that 18th day, I finally got a court date, went into court, and I had what was called a guardian ad litem. And so if you guys aren't familiar with that term, the term is someone that advocates for what's in the best interest of the child. And I remember hearing that word advocate and thinking, like, I want to do that someday. I want to advocate for kids like me who are coming from hard places, who don't know how or can't communicate what they're going through. And so my guardian ad litem, she was trying to take me into a room by myself so that she could talk to me about what was going on in my home. And every time we would go and be in a room by ourselves, my mom would start banging on the door. And we would move, we would leave the room, we would go to another room, and then my mom would continue to follow us. And so we were about on our 5th room when finally the door fell silent, And my guardian ad litem promised me that whatever I told her would be safe with her. And I thought, okay, I really believe that was true. And I thought, when I step out of this room, I believe that I'm going to be stepping out of the abuse. And so I told her all of the things that were happening in our home. And when I stepped out, my mom was standing right there. And it was one of the scariest things, because my mom always told me if I ever told anyone that everything at home would get worse, which was one of the reasons I was very silent at school, and why, even though teachers knew what was happening, I always made up lies. And so because my mom was making this commotion in the courtroom, the judge decided that the charges that were pressed against me probably weren't what there was a domestic violence, probably weren't what it was believed to be. And then he put me into the foster care system because he said, I do believe that there's more to this story. From there, in my first foster home with my sister, I thought, this is our way out. Like, we get a family, we're going to get to live a normal life. And I was very excited for what the foster care system was going to be. And I had a lot of hopes and dreams for our to-be family. We walked into our first room at our foster home, and there were 11 beds in one room. And I look back now, and I know what that means. I really do believe that there are foster parents who don't do it for the money. And I would actually say that that's the majority, because foster care is really hard. Me and my husband have done it, and it was very hard. And so it's hard that money can be the only motivation. However, I know now what all those beds were. My sister came to me probably within our third week of being at that home, and she reported abuse. I didn't really know what to do with that, so I called someone that was a mentor to me back home, and she had a very easy number to remember. I stole someone's phone at school, and I called her, and I said, this is what my sister told me. I actually left her a voicemail on her phone. I said, I don't know what to do. And within about 2 hours, Human Services was at the school, and they started an investigation. The words that my sister told me, I didn't want to say out loud. And so they shut their binders, and they said that I was lying. And my sister and I were separated. She stayed in that home, and I moved to my first group home. After that, I moved throughout 12 different homes. And throughout my foster care experience, because of that very first home, there were a lot of negative labels placed on me. I was considered hard to place. I was considered unplaceable, unadoptable very early on. And that made me very hopeless, because I thought going into the foster care system was going to allow me to be adopted. And it was going to allow me to have the family that I hoped me and my sister would have. And I always thought, what if I just would have stayed silent? Then I would have stayed with my sister, and I would have been able to protect her. And so it was this very difficult thing that I still have to work through. Asking myself, is my sister staying in that home? Was it my fault? Was this being separated my fault? And when I was in high school, with all these negative labels spoken over me, I always just wanted to prove people wrong. I wanted to show them that I was a good kid. And so one of the goals that I had for myself was that I wanted to have good grades. And I was able to be a 4.0 student, and it was all because I wanted to stand on a stage like this, and I wanted to be able to give a speech that said, look, I can't be that bad of a kid after all. My junior year, I had to move another home because I was living in actually a kinship home, and I really liked it there. But they had a felon move into the home, and so I can no longer, they put the mailing, I didn't tell anybody because I was like, I kind of like it here. But they put their mailing address there, and somehow my caseworkers found out. And so I was moved out of that home. And then a track coach. My track coach came into my life in between my junior and senior year. And he said, Tori, I think that you can go on to the state track meet. I think you can win it. And that was like crazy, because I never really heard anybody say anything like that to me, because there were all these negative labels placed over me, and everyone was always wondering why I was moving, and everyone was always believing that it was my fault, even though sometimes it was reasons like that, reasons completely out of my control. And then I was at my 12th foster home, so this was the very last one. I was about to become 18, and my foster mom's name, I think that's Tanya. This is Gina. So this was my 12th foster home. And when my track coach told me, Tori, I believe that you can go into the state track meet, and I think you can win it. I remember like communicating that to people, and people not believing me. But when I moved out of that home where the felon moved in, and I had to move to another group home out of town. I had to stop going to school. Because they knew that the group home, like I didn't qualify to be in it. And so there was like some kind of policy that I couldn't be there longer than 3 weeks. They wanted to bring me back to my school. And so we were kind of in this waiting period, and my grades dropped by the time I got back. And so that 4.0 went to a 3.9, and I was no longer going to be valedictorian. But my track coach, he gave me this different goal of becoming a 4-time state champion. And even though I thought, okay, this like old man is crazy, I thought we're just going to like do what he says. And if it doesn't happen, we're just going to blame him, because it was his crazy idea. And then I was living with this woman named Gina. And she, I had foster parents who I would ask for something, and it always felt like quite a burden. And I was living with Gina, and I was like, I need track shoes. And she just didn't even hesitate. And Gina, even Gina would say this about herself, okay, guys? So I'm not just saying it. But like, this is the epitome of Gina. My favorite recipe that she taught me was this chip dip, okay? And this is how you make it. You didn't know you were going to go home with a recipe. It's a stick of butter, a can of corn, and a block of cream cheese. And it is so good, okay? And you melt it. And eventually I was like, Gina, we can't be eating this every day if I'm trying to be a state champion. And like, that was just like Gina's diet. And I was like, Gina, I gotta like go and get like organic food. And I got kind of high maintenance by the end. And Gina, like, she just never hesitated. And I think it's because she really believed in me. And then, like, the final rule that I think was kind of a hard one to follow was that whenever me and my track coach, because me and my track coach, we trained out of season. Like, if you want to, the crazy thing about the whole state champion thing was that I'd never been to state in an individual race. And there was the defending state champion that had won as a junior, and she was a senior. And so I remember when I would train, I would ask myself, I would like want to quit because the workouts were hard, and I was having to lift in the weight room, and I thought, oh, this is so manly, and I don't want to do manly things. And I remember asking myself, would a state champion quit? And that just continued to keep me going. And when me and my track coach would do these one-on-one coaching sessions out of season, Gina, my foster mom, she would have to be there the whole entire time. That was like the policy that was put in place because he was a male, and she did. And she was a nursing student also. She was a nursing student, she was a foster mom, and she was working full time. And she would just like do her homework while I trained with the track, and she always made sure that I got to my practices. And it started to click real fast. Oh my God, look, you're just like seeing the whole thing before. Sorry. And that year, I became a 4-time state champion in track and field. Something, I know that not everyone in here is religious, and that's okay. But something that I promised God, because I thought that I could bargain with him, was that I prayed every night before that. And I said, God, if you just let me be a state champion, I'll tell people that it was because of you. So now I have to say that. That it was because of God. And like truly, it was some kind of miracle, because I was up against the defending state champion. I'd never been to state individually. And like, this was the day that I knew my life changed. This was the day that I knew my life was going to go down a different path. And it was because someone chose to speak something different over me than the typical narrative. And then my track coach, he's the one standing next to me, took me into his home after I emancipated, and he adopted me into his family. So this man is who my children call Grandpa. This man is the family that I would go back to every holiday for Christmas, and he's the best gift giver. And I always wondered, how do we not know each other, and you're still able to, know me? And there's so much healing because I had just asked, hoped for a father for so long. And because my mom, like I said, was a single mom, and I always felt in foster homes that because of that first foster placement, that fathers were distant from me, and then I was given a father. I was able to go to college on a full-ride scholarship, a track scholarship, and I became a part of the 3% of former foster youth to graduate. I graduated from Hillsdale College in 2018. Thank you. And then I married Jacob. He is the one in the hat backwards. So I married Jacob, and then we had our first son, Leander. And then in between our first biological son and our biological daughter, we got a phone call. People knew that we did foster care advocacy. People knew that we were involved in different foster care ministries and foster care nonprofits. And a lot of what I was doing at the time, and a lot of what I still do, is that I share on social media. And you can say what you want about social media, but it is a place that you can be such a light that you can put a lot of good out there in a place where there's a lot of bad. And so I started sharing my story on social media and encouraging people through there. And the messages that I've received are incredible, and that's why I keep doing it. I've received messages from people that said, we started foster care 2 years ago, and today we're adopting our daughter because we heard your story. There have been people that have said, former foster youth that have reached out and said, yesterday I was thinking about ending my life, and then I read your post, and I rethought about that decision. And so I keep showing up on social media because it is a dark place, and it is a hard place, but it's such a beautiful place to be a light. And so at this time, I was sharing a lot on social media. People knew about me and what me and my husband were doing. And so I literally got a message that turned into a phone call that said, there's a young man living in public bathrooms about 2 hours away from you. Will you come pick him up? And so what ended up happening is the woman ended up driving him to our home. And he had one bag of his things. And he didn't bring it because he said, I'm not going to stay there, but I'll meet them. And then he got there and he said, okay, I do want to stay here. So we had to drive 2 hours for this one bag. But we did it. And we did it. The most important part was that there was a lot of documents in there that were very important to him because he is an immigrant. And he wanted to very much become a citizen, and he wanted to stay here. So we went back, we got those documents, and then probably about 6 months later, I birthed our second born, Ezri. So Leander is our firstborn, Ezri, and then Sar is the one in the middle. And then in 2020, I founded a 501c3 nonprofit called the Beloved Initiative. I knew that as I was sharing on social media, I was getting a lot of messages from former foster youth asking me, how have you healed? How can I share my story like you have? They were asking for resources. They wanted their voices to be elevated, but I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't have the resources to do it alone. So I started the Beloved Initiative, and what we started doing was free family photos, because as a foster parent, as any family, free family photos are a large investment. And oftentimes, foster youth are not in the family photos, and they're told that they belong, but they never see their picture on a wall. And that's because that you never know. You never know if they're going to be in your home the next day or the next month or the next year. And so we traveled all over the nation and gave foster families free family photos. And then when we got there, we asked the youth, the kids, if they wanted to advocate for themselves, if they wanted to say something, if they wanted to write something that would encourage another foster youth. And so this young woman, she was in the foster care system, but she wanted people to know that her baby was not, because she was doing everything for her child not to be in foster care. And just because she was in the foster care system at that time didn't mean her baby was. And she felt like that was like such an important message, because she knew that there were other people who had children and other children who had children in the foster care system. And she wanted to show people that she was a good mom. This girl wanted to tell people that she was a good friend, even though she had moved a lot and had a lot of different friends. And this girl wanted to tell people that she was competitive and strong. And there were just so many beautiful signs that came out of that, and a lot of awesome awareness that we couldn't have even made up ourselves. And it was because we let them do it for themselves. And then about a year ago, my biological sibling reached out to me, and she said, I am not in a very good situation, and I would like to come visit you for spring break. At the time, my husband and I were living in Minnesota, and my sister was living in Ohio. She's amazing. She's a 4.0 student. She's very intelligent, and she loved being at the school that she was in. But she said, she came and visited us, and she said, I really want to live with you, but I do not want to move. And so we picked up everything, and we moved from Minnesota back to my hometown, and me and my sister reunited for the first time. My sister now lives with me full time, and about 7 months ago, she asked me for a snake. And I told her that she had to do a persuasion PowerPoint. And so we sat in our living room with popcorn, of course, and she gave us a persuasion PowerPoint on her snake, whose name is now Spoons. We have a lot of rules around it, though, so she has to feed it mice, and the rule is that she can only feed it frozen mice, because I do not want any live mice in my house. And the other one is that I can't ever see the mice. So, like, we got a separate freezer that goes in the basement for the mice, and it's like a whole big freezer. The mice are the only thing in that freezer, because I can't see them. About 6 months ago, my book Fostered released, and I wanted to write this book because I wanted youth in foster care, kids who came from hard places, to know that they could do hard things. I wanted them to know their true identity, and not the identity that followed them around in their case file, or that was spoken to them by maybe families that were unstable. And then this book became so much more than that. It really was supposed to be like when you write a book, you write a book proposal to a literary agent and a publisher. And when I wrote it, I said, like, this is for youth and young adults who've experienced hard things, because you have to tell them about your audience. And I believe that God did what only He could do, and this book has been able to be published in multiple countries, and it has been turned into a resource for people who want to help kids from hard places, who want to help underserved populations. It's become a resource for county agencies, adoption agencies, foster care agencies, and foster parents all around the nation. And thank you, thank you. And it was just something that I couldn't have even. Oh, can I pause this? Can you pause it? Who's back there? Thanks. Yeah, it just became something that I could have never anticipated for it to become. And then when I published my book, again, former foster youth, and more than former foster youth, it became just survivors, human trafficking survivors, abuse survivors, trauma survivors were starting to reach out to me, and they're like, how did you do this? Like, how did you overcome all of these things? Because I still face trauma today. And I tell them, like, all the time that, I still face trauma. I'm still going through the hard. But I love the story of Jesus sleeping through the storm. Like, whether you're religious or not, there's cool stories in the Bible, okay? And one of those is, like, that Jesus slept through the storm. And I think that, like, we have the power within ourselves to do the same thing within the storms in our brain. Like, we have the power to become storm sleepers, even though sometimes that storm in our brain, in our bodies, never really goes away as trauma survivors. And so, as they were just asking me, like, how did you overcome? I realized that I was given so many resources throughout my young adulthood. I started counseling pretty much as soon as I entered the foster care system that second time. It was mandated by the judge, and then in my group home, it was also mandatory. And I felt very thankful because what it did was it gave me this ability to learn how to process, like, my very large emotions, which I still have, at a very young age. And it's like why I know how to write, because, like, it all started when I was 12 or 13, when I was in therapy trying to process the abuse that I had been through. But what I noticed is that, sometimes there's really not good resources for youth in foster care, especially young adults who have aged out and the benefits have ended. And I'm 27 now, but in Ohio, like, it was just like last year that they extended everything to 26, and then I wasn't 26 anymore. And so I was really thinking about, like, young adults and people who don't have access to beautiful, good, meaningful healing modalities. And so the Beloved Initiative took a turn, and what we started to do was host retreats that we call writing retreats or storytelling retreats. And we encourage people who want to share their story to come to them, survivors who want to share their story. And what we do when they get there is we do talk about, like, the business of books, and we talk about speaking and how you can get into this space. But what we talk about most importantly is that if you want to share your story to heal people and to help people, you have to share it from a place of healing. And then we jump into a lot of different healing modalities. We have on-staff therapists who help the girls, the women. We've only had women so far, and I think it's because I'm a woman, but I would love to have men someday, but only women apply. So women. But it's really open to, like, just survivors. So the survivors come and they process through their stories. And another, thing that I wouldn't be who I am without it is community, is people that rallied around me and spoke truth over me and continued to encourage me, because even though, like, I'm talking about all the, like, the mountaintop parts of my story, because that's what you have to do in an hour, but, like, there are a lot of lulls. There were a lot of times where I would yell at my track coach, and I would slam the door in his face, and I would say, "You're not my dad." And I would be like, "You're kicking me out," even though he totally wasn't kicking me out. And he would always say, like, "This door is open to you. You're always welcome here." And that is what kept me. And I had a community of people who let me into their homes and showed me the messiness of their lives and made me feel like I wasn't alone, and they just continued to speak truth over me. From a pretty young age, when my foster parents started taking me to church, people always told me that I would do something like this, and I didn't even know what they were talking about. But now that I do it, I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what everybody said. And I think that it had so much to do with having a strong community to support me. And it's still that, the case now. I'm an adult and I have to travel everywhere. And I have, like, this is what I do full time. I speak. And, sometimes my husband comes with me depending on the trip. And we have to have a community to be with our children and support the work we do. And so with the Beloved Initiative, we really wanted to put these survivors in a community of people that spoke truth over them and that were going to be there for one another. And there's so much healing in mutuality and lived experience. The reality is only 2% of people 2% of people in America have actually lived in the foster care system as a kid. And with that, the statistics are different, but statistics say that 70 to 85% of human trafficking survivors are directly involved in the foster care system. And so just abuse and exploitation in foster care overlap. And so what we did with the Beloved Initiative is that we started writing storytelling retreats to give survivors all these things. And this video is just a short clip of that. The context behind how this video was made, we had a human trafficking survivor attending. She was trafficked by her parents, and I'm sorry if this is going to trigger, I'm just putting the trigger warning out there. And her trafficking was used as videos. And so we had a photographer because we wanted to show people what we did. And she said, I just can't have this camera around. And we said, okay, the camera's just not going to be around then, because the whole point of it was healing. And then by the end of the trip, she said, I think we should all do a testimony video. I was like, what? And I was like, okay, whatever you want to do. And then she was like, our photographer's name was Caleb. She was like, Caleb, we're going to make a testimony video, and we're going to tell people what this did for us. And I was like, okay, yeah, we probably need that. And she was the first person to get in front of the camera, and she stepped away, and she said, I did it. I stepped in front of a camera, and I did what I wanted to do. And we just all started weeping. It was one of the most powerful moments I've actually experienced in my entire life to date. It topped being a 4-time state champion. It was truly incredible. And so this is the video that she pretty much made.
Wanted in this journey of sharing our stories for these women to have a community. And so here at the Survivors Thriving and Writing Retreat and Workshop, we wanted to validate survivors, and we wanted to experience the healing parts of sharing their stories. This retreat has been incredible for so many reasons. Being in that room the first night, and all of these women are just together, and we're all teary-eyed. I felt so understood, and I felt so seen in that moment, and that's really one of the most powerful things a survivor can experience. So
to be able to sit with a dozen other women who not only understand it, but can articulate it.
It's not just about writing, it's also about feeling seen.
We went from a group of strangers to family.
It's giving me a tangible community, a person to hug.
As somebody who came in afraid to share and afraid of how I would be received, the group of people that happened to be assembled, the 12 women, the speakers, it was the literal perfect group of people who needed each other at this moment.
In the way that I was helped here, I want to go and I want to help the women in my community.
Last night, I went to bed feeling like I've got so many people that got my back, and I don't even know what's going to come, but I just feel like I have a whole army of people who have my back for what's next for me.
There's this idea of being a voice for the voiceless, but those that we name voiceless, they usually have a voice. And so this is an opportunity for them to reclaim their voices, for them to be heard, and for us to amplify their voices. And so if you want to support giving the voiceless back their voice, I would so appreciate if you join us in this mission.
Has anyone here read The Body Keeps the Score? I'm very glad that many of you raised your hand. If you haven't read it in this space, you most definitely should. One of the biggest takeaways from that book for me, the author says that I'm going to cry. Oh, that video always makes me cry. It always does me in. But the author says that there are different modalities of therapy. or there are different modalities for healing, effective ways for healing. And he says medication is one of those ways. He says therapy is one of those ways, but he says the most effective way that we heal trauma in our mind and in our bodies is when we have experiences that directly contradict the traumatic experience. And so that's like our whole mission with these retreats, is that we create memories that contradict all of the trauma. And so we make sure that it's in a beautiful place, and we pay for the women to get into the national parks, and we go on walks, and they some of these women have never even been on planes before. They've never even been out of the state because they're still working through their trauma, and they're still working to become emotionally, physically, financially stable. And the most important part of all of this is that we make it affordable. We make it affordable for every single woman by finding sponsorship so that it can be possible. Because there's healing retreats everywhere. But the whole point of this is that we make it accessible, because when you come from hard places, things continue to be hard oftentimes because you don't have access to the things that you should be able to if things weren't so hard. And so a large part of, since I've started these retreats, a large part of my work, aside from speaking and writing, is that I've been able to partner with other organizations who would like to help survivors, especially former foster youth. And we've been able to take our program and join other organizations in it. So she said that I was busy this past week, and she said that because I just got back from Mexico. We took 12 former foster youth, and former and current actually, and we went to go build a home for a family who did not have a home in Mexico. The program was called, thank you. You guys are so nice. All you're clapping. The program was called Rebuilding Home, and the point of it was to show former foster youth that they can have the things and build the things that they've never had, and they can break generational curses for themselves, but they can also break generational curses, generational poverty for those around them. And then that same week, our SAR became a citizen. So we flew to Dallas, and it was incredible. We've learned so much about immigration through his journey, and I'm just really thankful that he let us in to be a part of it, because it's so opened our eyes. But we watched 550 people become citizens from 90 different countries. It was truly so emotional and incredible. And this story that I get to share with you guys, I'm not like a teacher, unless, sometimes I get to go teach the Bible, which is really cool. But really, when I share this kind of stuff, I'm not a teacher. I just hope that people can glean from the mistakes that were made in my story by the adults and the heroes in my story, because there are so many heroes in my story, my track coach, my community. And what I want to leave you guys with is what I feel like my track coach did was, there's this quote that I say, and it's, "I love you already." And I say this because I feel like it's this short little quote that's so powerful. And it means that, we don't have to know the end of the story. My track coach, my community, the people that I talk about and praise on stages, they did not know. They actually probably believed that this would not be the case. They had all the reason to believe that this would not be the case because of what my file said about me, because of what my community said about me. But what they chose to do was to love me already, and to just speak words of life over me, and to see the potential and the purpose and the plan that could be. And my track coach, of course, he loved me, but there was Gina, who sacrificed so much. To me, it was such a huge sacrifice as a foster parent. And then there was a woman named Tanya, and still to this day, I go to her home like every single night. And she is my mother figure. And all of these people, they just sang this anthem, the anthem that I think is really just the balm to what we need to heal youth coming from hard places. And that is, I love you already. I don't have to know the end of the story. You don't have to be a success story for me to say and do and be a part of your life.